Shatukosharaveshtasya Samvado Dhyatma Samsritaha Yadvasa Bhagavams Tasmai Prishtas Tattvam Uvachaha. So there is the text 50, which I'll just recite and then we can do the word for word. Bruhi nashtad yam somya vidurasya vichestitam bandhu chaga niminitam bandhu chaga nimitam cha yataiva gatavam punaha Shatu of Vidura, Kosharave, as that of Maitreya, Tasya, there, Samvada, news, Adhyatma, in the matter of transcendental knowledge, Samsrita, full of, Yat, which, Va, anything else, Saha, he, Bhagavan, his grace, Tasmai, unto him, Prishtaha, inquired, Tattvam, the truth, Uvacha, answered, Ha, in the past, Bruhi, please tell, Na, unto us, Tat, those matters, Idam, here, Somya, O gentle one, Vidurasya, of Vidura, Vichestitam, activities, Bandhujaga, renouncing the friends, Nimitam, the cause of, Cha, also, Yataha, as, Eva, also, Agatavan, came back, Punaha, again at home. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Shaunaka Rishi said, "Let us know, please, what topics were discussed between Vidura and Maitreya, who talked on transcendental subjects, and what was inquired by Vidura and replied by Maitreya. Also, please let us know the reason for Vidura's giving up the connection of his family members and why he again came home. Please also let us know the activities of Vidura while he was in the places of pilgrimage." Purport. Sri Sutta Goswami was narrating the topics of the creation and destruction of the material world, but it appears that the rishis headed by Shaunaka were more inclined to hear of transcendental subjects which are on a higher level than the physical. There are two classes of men, namely those too addicted to the gross body and the material world, and others on the higher level who are interested more in transcendental knowledge. Srimad Bhagavatam gives facility to everyone, both to the materialistic and to the transcendentalist. By hearing Srimad Bhagavatam in the matter of the Lord's glorious activities, both in the material world and in the transcendental world, men can derive equal benefit. Materialists are more interested in the physical laws and how they are acting, and they see wonders in those physical glamours. Sometimes, due to physical glamours, they forget the glories of the Lord. They should know definitely that physical activities and their wonders are all initiated by the Lord. The rose in the garden gradually takes its shape and colour to become beautiful and sweet not by a blind physical law, although it appears like that. Behind that physical law is the direction of the complete consciousness of the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, things cannot take shape so systematically. The artist draws a picture of a rose very nicely with all attention and artistic sense, and yet it does not become as perfect as the real rose. If that is the real fact, how can we say that the real rose has taken its shape without intelligence behind the beauty? This sort of conclusion is due to a poor fund of knowledge. One must know from the above description of creation and annihilation that the Supreme Consciousness, being omnipotent, can take care of everything with perfect attention. That is the fact of the omnipresence of the Supreme Lord. Persons still more foolish than the gross materialists, however, claim to be transcendentalists and claim to have such supreme, all-pervading consciousness, but offer no proof. Such foolish persons cannot know what is going on behind the next wall, yet they are falsely proud of possessing the cosmic, all-pervading consciousness of the Supreme Person. For them also, hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam is a great help. It will open their eyes to see that simply by claiming a supreme consciousness, one does not become supremely conscious. One has to prove in the physical world that he has such supreme consciousness. The rishis of Naimisharanya, however, were above the gross materialists and the false transcendentalists, and thus they were always anxious to know the real truth in transcendental matters as discussed by authorities. Omajnana timanandasya gyananjana shalakaya chakshul unmalitam jena tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langhayate gurum yat kripa tamaham vande Sri Gurum Dinatarnam. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master has very kindly come, forced to open my eyes with the torchlight of transcendental knowledge. I offer my most respectful obeisances unto his lotus feet. By the grace of the spiritual master, the saviour of all fallen souls, even a lame man can cross over mountains, a blind man can see stars in the sky, and a dumb man can recite eloquent Vedic poetry. Nigamakalpa karo dalitam phalam sukam mukha amrita dharava samyitam hibata bhagavatam rasam alayam aho rasiki bhuvi bhavakaha narayanam namaskritya naram chaivan narottamam devim sarasvati vyasam tatodayam udidarayat nastaprayashu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati utamashloki bhakti bhavati nashtiki. The Srimad Bhagavatam is the mature fruit of the tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this nectarian fruit is all the more relishable by liberated souls. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, and unto Mara Sarasvati, the goddess of learning. By regularly hearing the Bhagavatam and rendering service unto the pure devotees, all that is troublesome to the heart is practically destroyed, and loving service unto the glorious Lord, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. So, Srimad Bhagavatam is described as the ripened fruit of the tree of Vedic literatures, which is very profound in itself. We know that trees are considered pious or impious, depending on whether they produce something beneficial for all creatures, large and small. And of course, the ultimate glory of a tree is if it produces delicious, succulent, nutritious fruits, such as mangoes, king of all fruits. Of course, trees have many wonderful attributes. They provide shelter, shade, timber, Srikavacha informed me once that just like we're doing some pruning of some of our mango trees at the moment by a qualified arborist, and that timber, you told me, is when dried is very good for yagyas, for performing Agnihotra fire yagyas. Did you say best? Good, it's very good. So, so a very auspicious tree, the mango tree, even. And what to speak of the fruits. So this Bhagavatam is described as the ripened fruit of the vast tree of Vedic literatures. And there's something in the Vedas for everyone, as Prabhupada is describing so nicely here. One may be very materialistic, one may be an aspiring philosopher, transcendentalist. There's something for everyone. And there's a delightful example given by Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur in regard to Srila Vyasadeva. Vyas means compiler or editor. So at the beginning of this age of Kali, Vyasadeva, literary incarnation of Lord Narayan, he took the trouble to compile and to edit all the Vedas and to write them down for the first time. In previous ages, people's memories were so sharp they could hear something once and they'd remember it their whole lifetimes. Not so in Kali Yuga. So Vyasadeva here is described by Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur. He's compared to a very, very trustworthy man who is engaged by a king to sort out the king's treasury. The king has vast amounts of gold and silver coins of all shapes and sizes. He has priceless jewels, emeralds, diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and so on. But the treasury is a little bit neglected, disorganized. So the king engages this trustworthy man, and he puts everything, all the jewelry, all the coins, in nice places, organizes it very nicely. So this example is used to describe Srila Vyasadeva, who took the trouble at the beginning of Kali Yuga. Originally there was one Veda, but then he divided that into 4 Rig, Yajur, Sama and Atharva Vedas, and he gave each one of those 4 Vedas to one of his 4 leading disciples, and he instructed them, you study this and then you in turn pass that knowledge on to your disciples as a greatly learned professor. So this he did. He also composed 2 wonderful books of his own at that point, and one is the history of the world, known as the Mahabharata, the history of Greater India, which included all the continents and everything that was going on up until that point 5,000 years ago. And he also gave the world Vedanta Sutra, which is sometimes likened to a distillation, condensed essence of all the 108 Upanishads, which he also wrote down. So there's a sequence there, from the 4 Vedas to the Upanishads, to Vedanta Sutra, to a great history of the world, and then we also have 18 principal Puranas. The word Purana means old history. So they're wonderful narrations, actual historical narrations of events that took place not only in this universe but other universes at all since time immemorial. So those 18 Puranas are there as well, and topmost amongst them is described as this Bhagavat Purana, Srimad Bhagavatam, the beautiful story of the personality of Godhead and his devotees. So it's a wonderful, very rich spiritual tradition, which we're all very fortunate to have either stumbled across or by some previous pious activities, punya karma, agyata sukriti, unknowing pious activities. We've become attracted to Krishna and his loving devotional service and his devotees, and we're now relishing this wonderful literature, Srimad Bhagavatam. So that is, we're very, of course, grateful. Regularly we observe the appearance days of our respective spiritual masters, and that day is known as Vyas Puja, because spiritual masters are likened to they are the representatives of Srila Vyasadeva. So Vyas Puja means we're worshipping the Guru as the representative of Vyasa, coming in that wonderful chain of disciplic succession. Just as there are links in a chain, so similarly, again back to the mango trees, mangoes or any other delicious succulent fruits, they're very delicate. They're passed down during the harvesting season from one hand to another. So they reach the ground intact, in perfect condition. So that is how spiritual knowledge is meant to be passed down from guru to disciple, and that disciple in turn, if qualified, initiates his own disciples in that way. The knowledge comes down unchanged. And Srila Vyasadeva's son, Shukadeva, he is the speaker of this wonderful narration. Sukha means parrot, and there are two examples in that regard. One is that fruits are even more delicious when they're pecked by the beak of a parrot. So this Bhagavatam, when tasted by the son of Vyasadeva, Sukadeva Goswami, it's said that it became even more relishable. And similarly, Sukadeva Goswami, he simply repeated, just like you can teach parrots to repeat many words, especially our sulphur-crested cockatoos, which we know live a very long time. We had a devotee in New Zealand, he had a sulphur-crested cockatoo, and he was able to teach that to chant Hare Krishna very easily. And he taught it many other words as well. And the cockatoo was very attached to this particular devotee. His name was Kala Samvara, some of you may know him. And sometimes somebody else would come into the room where Cocky, as he was affectionately known by the devotees, would be, and he'd chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Where's Kailash? So Sukadeva Goswami, he faithfully repeated, just like what he'd heard from his great father. He didn't alter anything. So it's been passed down very wonderfully like that. So, and Srimad Bhagavatam is described, Srimad Bhagavatam Amalam Puranam Vaishnavanam Priyam. It's the Spotless Piranha, because it doesn't encourage living entities to engage in fruitive activity. The original Vedas do, just like if we buy a very sophisticated piece of electronic equipment, or even a motor car, even a watch. We recently bought a new watch, and it came with a little booklet, how best to utilize all the features of the watch. So similarly, we can never accuse Krishna of being callous towards his parts and parcels. All of us living entities in whatever bodies we're in. No, he gives very nice manuals. It's said actually there are 3 co-eternals: the Supreme Lord, the living entities, and the Vedic literatures. All describe 3 co-eternals, always existing. We've always existed. Krishna explains that to Arjuna. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So everyone's existing since time immemorial. We don't get too much concerned where we've been in previous lifetimes. It's a little like if you get injured on a battlefield. In ancient times, you didn't ponder too much who shot these arrows at me, or in the modern day, tragically, where did all these bullets come from? No, you hasten to get medical attention to remove the arrows of the bullets. So similarly, what we've done, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has wonderfully written, "Forget the past that sleeps, and ne'er the future dream at all, but live in times that are with thee, and progress ye shall call." So we've existed since time immemorial. Krishna's been there since forever. And similarly, there's always guidebooks for human beings. Of course, animals are not accustomed to reading. They react and live purely on instinct, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. But human beings, we have developed consciousness. We can inquire into the nature of the absolute truth. And Prabhupada would often quote these first stanzas from the Vedanta Sutra, Tato Brahma Jignasa and Janmadhyasya Yataha. That now I've got a human form of life, now is the opportune time to inquire into the nature of the absolute truth. And what is that absolute truth? He from whom everything emanates. So Vedas are there, and Krishna encourages human beings, act in this way. Follow these injunctions which are there in the Vedic literatures, and you'll have a good life. You'll be happy in this world, and you'll be happy in the next world. You'll get a good destination. You go up and not down. But if you're really intelligent, then you'll try to get out of material life altogether. And Prabhupada does make we're getting towards the summary. There's just one more verse in this particular chapter, the end of the 2nd canto. And Prabhupada does make an interesting point here. As he often did, he would draw comparisons between life in this material world. And this chapter it is described, Bhagavatam as the answer of all questions, answer to all questions. And it's described a lot in this 2nd canto, the creation, how everything came about. But Krishna's creation, for very advanced transcendentalists, is not considered one of his most relishable pastimes, shall we say. For example, Lord Mahavishnu lies down, he goes to sleep, and during his sleep, all the universes come out. So that's a very simplistic explanation, but we've heard much more elaborate explanations. But that for the advanced transcendentalists, it's not considered one of his most relishable pastimes, shall we say. For example, Lord Mahavishnu lies down, he goes to sleep, and during his sleep, all the universes come out. So that's a very simplistic explanation, but we've heard much more elaborate explanations. advanced transcendentalists, the great lovers of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is not considered one of his most fascinating pastimes, but still it's there to satisfy those. A little like in a prison house, the prisoners don't know too much about what's going on outside the prison, or at least in olden days they didn't. There were no newspapers. I think prisoners nowadays each have a television in their cells so they can get some information. But in olden days, prisoners had no idea what was going on outside their prison cells. They were preoccupied with what type of meals they were going to be served. Perhaps they had a library. What books are in the library? Very simple. But there's a whole other world going on outside the walls of prison. So similarly, there is a whole other dimension, the transcendental world, Vaikuntha and Goloka Vrindavan. And Srimad Bhagavatam gives us a window into that transcendental realm. So everyone has to accept some authority. As children or young adults, we may not want to accept any authority. We don't want to accept the authority of our parents. As adolescents. But nonetheless, and of course, some people may complain that there's too many laws in a country. I think Singapore is sometimes described as a police state. Some people may say Australia is a police state. Also, we have so many laws. But a lot of us have figured out a long time ago that it's better to be a law-abiding citizen than to be antisocial and unlawful. Because otherwise, if you get caught, you end up in prison, and that's not a good place to be. So Vedic literatures are there meant to encourage us in a certain direction. And when Prabhupada visited Moscow, I think 1971, and met with Professor Kotovsky, who was an atheist and a communist, Prabhupada explained to him, well, we're all accepting some authority. You're accepting the authority of Karl Marx and Lenin and other founders of communism. We're accepting Krishna's authority, the speaker of Bhagavad Gita. So everyone's accepting some authority. And of course, we've found through practicing Krishna consciousness that it is a very wonderful lifestyle, and Krishna's instructions ring true and profoundly affecting our consciousness and in so many different ways. So some authority is there, and of course if one is fortunate, one does accept Krishna's wonderful authority. I've got a couple of Prabhupada stories which I might conclude with. We'll see how we go. Guests, strap yourselves in because we'll just sort of begin by mentioning that guru means heavy. Heavy with knowledge. And gurus are anxious to distribute that knowledge. So Srila Prabhupada could be extremely strong at times in his presentation of Krishna consciousness, our beloved founder Acharya. So on one occasion, Prabhupada was visiting. And that's actually his kindness. Sadhu means one who cuts through our ignorance, who delivers the absolute truth to us. Because people are suffering because of ignorance. Just like a physician. We may be suffering ill health and we go to a qualified medical practitioner and they diagnoses, well, you've got a tumour and we really have to cut it out. So there's going to be some pain there when we go into a surgical operation. But then if the operation is successful, we regain premium health. We're very grateful to that doctor who performed that operation, saved our life. So similarly, guru means one who wants to give out transcendental knowledge, and sometimes then there will be chastisement, there will be a very, very strong injunction. Okay, we've set the scene. Prabhupada in Philadelphia, I think 1975. There's two stories, okay? We'll deal with the heavy one first, all right? And then we'll lighten it up a little bit. Okay. So, as was the case from probably, the very early days, Prabhupada would ask to meet with leading members of society, scientists, philosophers, political leaders, and church leaders, and so on. So devotees would regularly bring important members of society to meet with Prabhupada. Prabhupada could see that his younger disciples were more than competent to speak the philosophy of Krishna consciousness to the general public and to convince new people to take up the process of bhakti. So on one occasion in Philadelphia, the temple president, Ravindra Swarup, and I've heard this story twice from two persons who are right in the room, first-hand accounts, and they're both distinguished scholars, both PhDs in comparative religion. So one gentleman was brought, he was an Indian man, and he was lecturing, he was a professor. So to my knowledge, in order to lecture in universities in the US, you must have a PhD, at least a master's degree. This man had a PhD. He was an Indian gentleman, and he was lecturing at one of the leading universities in Philadelphia in Hindu studies. So he came in, he was introduced to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada asked him, what is Hinduism? And the man said, I don't know. And Prabhupada really perked up. And he turned to there was another disciple of Prabhupada's in the room, also a PhD, Swarup Damodar Das Brahmachari in those days. And Prabhupada just motioned to him, what do we call this? And Swarup Damodar said either cheetah or rascal, Prabhupada. I've heard both. So that came from him. So Prabhupada said he should leave. He should leave the room. Harsh, huh? Prabhupada was just so disgusted, disappointed. The man was lecturing in Hinduism, and he was an Indian man. And when asked, what is Hinduism? The man said, I don't know. So it was, and he left. So that's one pastime. And similarly, at another evening darshan in Philadelphia, another gentleman came, and he was also an Indian man, and Prabhupada had made some small talk with him, asked him where he was from. His name was Dr. Anand, and he was teaching biology at a high school in Philadelphia. And he was from Orissa. And when Prabhupada said, poor frogs. And everyone in the room laughed, except poor Mr. Anand. He said, oh, no, Prabhupada, it is for science. And Prabhupada said, so we will anaesthetize you and dissect your body for science? And Mr. Anand said, oh yes, Prabhupada, I would gladly give my body for science. And of course, a nice sentiment, but and some of us may remember, I don't know if they still do this at high school, a long time since I've been in high school, but We can remember biology classes and dissecting frogs back in our day, and it wasn't pleasant. I think I became a vegetarian soon after that. So a couple of Prabhupada stories from those times, showing his mercy actually. But we might finish there, everyone. I'm feeling a bit naked without my usual notes, and we always like to prepare for classes, but Hare Krishna. Any questions, comments, or corrections this morning? Hare Krishna. I was praying to all of you for some intelligence, and so I'm very grateful. Thanks for illuminating me, everybody. I can repeat the question. I don't know if we have a microphone, and I don't think we're very microphone organised this morning. Yes?
You were mentioning the point about previously how people have really sharp memories and they can hear something once and remember their whole life. But I remember from my childhood, there's so many things I remember very clearly, like things like, I can remember the number plate of the first car we ever had, and the dresses I've lived out, stuff like that. But the thing is, it seems that in this day and age, we feel like it's like useless information, whereas previously people would fill their heads up with useful information, like topics of Krishna devotees and things like that.
Good comment. For those outside who couldn't catch that, Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhu just added that he and some of us may be able to remember some events from our early lives. In ancient times, people could remember. They were blessed, what's known as Shrutidara, I think. One is blessed with a very good memory. And in previous ages, people's heads were full of very meaningful, profound, deep philosophy. Whereas nowadays, generally speaking, but a lot of us, our consciousness is not filled with particularly profound transcendental subject matters. Everyone's being forced to cram and try and remember so many immaterial and very mundane things. So good point. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you. Anything else, ladies, gentlemen? All right, we will stop there. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.